This week's beginning tie videos for the beginners, we're going to go over materials and the different uses for it, and what the material does when it's in the water. I'm gonna show you. And you basically, you're trying to get a fish to bite your jig or fly, whichever one you're doing. So at different times of the day or different times of the year, the bait might be doing something different. Might be small, might be large, and you're trying to match the bait that you're trying to imitate. But with crappie fishing and brim, they'll hit just off of aggression. So your colors that you're using, that's why you can get away with using bright colors or dim colors. But crappie fishing is a lot like walleye fishing, because you use so many different colors and it attracts the fish. So I'm gonna go over about see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different materials, and these are pretty basic materials that you can tie your jigs with, and you can also tie your flies with. So I'm gonna move the camera over so I can get over here to my tying desk. There we go. All right, we got that cup of water, or that glass of water. And the first thing what I'm going to do, let me see if I can pull it in a little bit. That works. All right, the first one we're going to go over is Marabou. And Marabou comes strung. And what that means is there's a lot of pieces in a pack when you buy them. And then you're pulling out one particular piece and using that. And but we're gonna really get into the tying part of it. I just want to show you what materials, how different they are when you're using them. Like I say, we're gonna start off with Marabou. So I'm gonna grab a Marabou tail jig. I've got a little fishing line tied onto it. All right, that's your Marabou jig. And the way they're rigged, they're just gonna hang in the water like that. Okay, we're going to put it in this glass of water, and you'll be able to see what Marabou does when it's wet. All right, see how that tail is moving? It's just swimming along. And that's basically what your jig is doing when it's under a float. When you pull it towards you, it's going to rise up in the water column. Then when you stop, it's going to drop down. And that's most time when the fish are going to hit it. But see, that's a wavy tail. You have a lot of movement with that jig going through the water, even if you're reeling and stop every once in a while. But that's your movement with a Marabou jig. All right, our next material we're going to go over is Hackle. And it's strung just like the Marabou is. And you're using the tip, or you're using the whole feather. I use 2 pieces when I'm tying a Marabou tail, or a lot of V's tied in with one. So let's see what a hackle jig looks like in the water. Alright, there's your hackle jig. So let's put it in the water and see what she looks like. Now see, it's got a sharp movement. It ain't really fluttering. When it drops, it kind of goes up, and then when you stop, it's got a slow movement to it, like the bait would be sitting there. But when you're reeling it and letting it drop, it still does the same thing. That tail does have movement in it, which, like I said, that's what the fish are looking for. Sometimes though, fish just does not want much movement, and you have to put that jig down there and just hold it to get the fish to bite. All right, the next material we're going to go over is one of the favorite of mine, and that's squirrel tail. Anybody can find squirrel tail. If you see one hit on the side of the road, stop and get the squirrel tail. Go off the road, don't get hit by a car. But squirrel tails are cheap. You can get them any of your tying stores, and probably one of my favorite flies to tie with, or material to tie with. Alright, for some reason I forgot to put a string on this, so I'm just going to grab it with the hemostats. So we can see the movement of it. Alright, there's your squirrel tail jig. See, that jig is holding its form. There's a little bit of movement in it, but it's really holding its own. And then when you really get to work and see that tail ain't moving a whole lot, which is like a minnow or a shad when they're sitting still, they're not moving much. You might see that tail move every once in a while, but there's something about that movement of that squirrel tail that's just unmatched by many other materials. All right, let's get our next material, which is going to be kemp or calf hair. And what that is a calf tail, and they dye them to different colors. And what you do it a lot like a squirrel tail. You pull off a clump and tie your jig. Like I say, I ain't getting into that today. We'll get into that on our next time. All right, here's a kemp tail jig, which, like I said, is a calf tail. That's probably one of the most used jigs as far as dock shooting has ever been. There's quite a few people that ties with the kemp tail. So let's get it wet. Now see, it, even though it's stiffer, it moves a lot like Marabou and a Hackle jig. You can get that tail to move just a little bit, but when you're shooting it under dock, that jig's got a slow fall, and that's a 1/32 ounce. And in one of the videos I'm gonna make, I'm actually gonna show you how different jigs fall through the water column. I've got a 8-foot tube, and we're gonna drop some jigs in it, and you can count off and see what the depth and what fall they are, the fall rate. So that is your kemp tail. And see, pulling it out of the water, it looks like a shad. The tail just makes that body look to it. Okay, now we're gonna get into flank hair, feathers I mean. And this is a mallard flank. They come off every duck, different colors. So they make a nice jig and make a nice profile. Makes kind of a wider profile. Now this one's tied with a flank feather, and see how that flares out and makes a wider. Now you can actually wet it and pull it back in and kind of roll it between your fingers, and it will get a smaller profile. But a lot of these jigs are used especially on bluegill and crappie. So let's see what she does. If you notice, that tail don't move a whole lot, but it's got a little flick to it. But look at the size of the pattern it's putting off. See, that's putting off a big profile on the tail part, and that is definitely going to draw some attention to the fish. All right, so that covers the feathers and the hair that we're going to cover right now. Now we're going to get into some synthetics. And the synthetics, basically what it's doing is a lot of flash. So it's working through the water column. You can see all the flash in them jigs, or that material. And we're going to put one in there. I'm actually going to put two different synthetic materials through the water. Now that's one tied with some synthetic tail. And look at the flash in that. I mean, that just run a fish crazy. Let's see what she does in the water. Look at that wave. My goodness. Now, you don't think that's going to draw a fish attention? Setting at anywhere in the water. Any kind of a movement on that tail and that thing just moves. That particular jig has more movement even than the Marabou, and the Marabou is softer. But that jig has just got a fantastic movement to it. And like I say, it's a flash, and that's what you're doing. You're drawing the fish to this jig. Because what you're giving them, sometimes you're trying to imitate, and other times you want to show them something they ain't never seen before. All right, now that's one synthetic. Now this one here, this synthetic has more of a crimp to it. It's kind of, crinkled up. So it gives its own profile, plus look at all the flash in that. Let's put her in the water. And see, that one has a lot of movement. So the synthetics, what it's showing you as far as crappie fishing, walleye, bass, brim, you're using smaller or bigger jigs. But with that material, it is really going to draw attention to it. And it don't take a lot of movement to draw the attention. And as you're tying your jigs, put them in some water. Look at them, see what they're doing. Try your different lengths on your tails. Different amount of material you're putting in your tail. Because see, when that one comes out, it's then all pulled together, and it gives it that bait fish look to it. Now that's a longer tail than normally what I use on this size jig. But studying and trying your jigs is a main part of jig tying or fly tying. You want to know what that material's doing. You want to know how much material to put in that tail. You might want more, you might want less. Sometimes less is more, which means a fish will bite it faster with less material than if you got a lot of material tied in it. So for the lesson today, that covers a lot of materials and that you're going to be tying with. And it kind of shows you what this material does in the water. And you got to understand, if you just throwing it out, counting down, reeling back in, stop and reel, that jig's going to come up and it's going to fall. It's going to come up and it's going to fall. And when it falls, that's normally when the strike's going to happen. Fishing under a float. Any of these jigs are awesome fished under a float. And when you're using a float, a lot of people don't know how to really use a float with jig fishing. And what you're doing, you're throwing it out there, and that jig is falling through the water column. And when it hits bottom, it's just going to sit there like a bait does. But you can move that float just a foot, and that jig's going to come back up in the water column, and then it's going to drop back down. And that's normally when they hit. You'd already drawn attention to it. Now they just waiting for that fall to hit it. Cause the crappie feeds up, other fish they just feed straight on, whatever. But a crappie always feeds up. So a lot of times when people are not catching crappie, it's because they're fishing under the crappie, and the crappie are not going to fish down. They're going to fish up. So that's real important to really testing your jigs and knowing what they're going to do. And when you're fishing them, try your different depths. And I think once you study your material, you really get more of appreciation of what the jigs are doing. Because you can see all these different materials, there ain't a whole lot of difference in none of them. But what you're looking for is that profile, the flash, but that little bit of drop. You see that, you can see that wiggle in that tail. And that's why I love a squirrel tail and the calf tail. That's two real good jigs. But probably as far as fishing them, it's going to be a Marabou, Hackle, or the flank. That's kind of three materials that everybody is used to using, and they know how to fish it, or they'll learn how to fish it. So this week's lesson is learn your material. Test the material. Test the jigs. And really know what your jigs are going to do with amount of material that you got going in them. Because sometimes you might get out there and fish two different jigs. One's going to have more material or less, and you'll see which one the fish prefers. And sometimes it's less. That's where the saying, sometimes more is less. So